door and wants to talk about a water transfer, and somebody will say, well, oh, it's valid. There are good water transfers that are going to occur in the future, as we've heard from the film. Agriculture will, as business people, make agreements to transfer water. Metropolitan Water District, we'll hear from Steve, has been very successful, and I think win-win agriculture to urban water transfers. But the city of Los Angeles is burdened by this legacy. It's gotten into our psychology as well. We have a hard time having a conversation in the city of Los Angeles without tripping up over who we are, guilt, whatever it is. We need to get over it. We need to get over it fast. Water is about money. It's about politics. When we're lucky, the scientists get involved, and films like these really ring the alarm bell that we need to apply everything we can to solving the problem. This year, city of Los Angeles was 70% reliant on the Delta. 70% of the water that came to the city of Los Angeles came from the Delta. Is the city of Los Angeles engaged in the discussion of the Delta in the legislature? Well, our assemblyman can tell us, but they're not very engaged. They should be engaged. On a good year, they're 50% reliant. So what does that say? We need to have a strong view and engagement in the legislature, but even more importantly, as we go through the EIR process, the planning process on what is actually going to happen in the Delta, the city needs to have a place at the table, a proactive place at the table. This is a joint environmental and water supply effort. We can bring a lot to the table with what we've done here, Yellow River and other things we're doing on restoration to that solution. I want to talk about money for a minute. Just below the surface of all the good ideas that people have about water is money. So whether you're a farmer, whether you're an entrepreneur like me, whether you're the head of DWP and has to worry about that next rate hike, it's about money. Today, the city of Los Angeles has a plan for the future that relies on reclaimed water and conservation. Most of us would agree that's a terrific plan. But without a baseline of water that comes from the state water project, at least 50%, and hopefully it's going down, that plan doesn't work. You go into a deeper and deeper hole every year on water supply. Everybody wants to take a shower in the morning. Everybody wants to do this or that. We do a pretty good job in short term of saying we're going to cut back, but talk about sustainable conservation, and it gets tough. And it gets tough in the money area. Rates go up. Why do rates go up? Because we have fixed costs. So when you use less, you're paying more per unit of water. Tremendous conflict in our region, because this past year we got cut back, the rates went up 30%, and we know we have to make more investments. Conservation isn't free. Reclaimed water isn't free. Some people think a water bond is free, as the assemblyman has said. It's not. I totally agree with him. And it is a really serious conversation between where we're going to put our money and make our investments. And that will likely be the major discussion we have, I think, on the legislation in Sacramento. But we shouldn't walk away from it and say, well, education is more important, or schools, or whatever is more important. Somehow we need to find a balance. I think the leadership in Sacramento has been really good in looking at, well, when do we need this money? Do we need it next year? And when do we need money for education? And try and look ahead 20 years and figure out what is our capacity to make investments. How do we incentivize local agencies to make the investments we need? And how do we educate local folks about the reality that water rates are going to go up, whether we conserve or we invest in other things? And how do we have the conversation with them so they'll have the trust and the support for what we need to do? That's my pitch.
Thank you. Stephen Arakawa.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here today. My role at Metropolitan is I manage staff that deal with the planning for water supply and distribution capacity, and also the management of the state project in Colorado supplies. This is a time in my career, I think back in 1980 when I started, the threat to our water supply was theoretical in a way. Going back to the 1960s when we were dealing with Arizona on the Colorado River, knowing that at some point we were going to have to back off on Colorado supply. State project, I think the state project always was envisioned to have more pieces to it, but it never got done. So when I started my career, there was always a push for doing something, because at some point in time, that water supply system would no longer operate the way it's supposed to. Right now, that's where we are. This is a real crisis. This is a real situation where the water supply has gotten cut back. What I thought I'd do today is give you my thoughts on how our statewide system, our imported system on the state water project, how that is tied to our local water management, and how we're going to meet our future growth for supply, which will be through our local water management. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, we had a severe drought. We had a 5-year drought. Maybe in the future they get worse and worse depending upon climate change. But at that time, the investments that we made were more geared towards dry year supply, making sure that we were able to import water, deliver it in a dry year on a reliable basis. But the fact was, in the late 80s and early 90s, both because of drought and because of the emergence of fishery issues, we found ourselves vulnerable. And our storage capability at that time was very limited. We had areas that had to go to mandatory rationing, conservation, and that had significant economic impact. What happened since that time, though, was investments were made to significantly increase our ability to store water in wet years and use it in dry years. So we went away from that idea that we're going to only rely on dry year supply. So we wanted to take the conflict that occurs in those dry years and diminish it greatly by utilizing water in wetter years, managing it, banking it in groundwater basins and surface storage. The other is we really dramatically increased our conservation efforts. Spent a lot of money on retrofitting devices, acknowledging that a lot of the progress has been on residential, indoor, progress recently on commercial and industrial conservation. Much more needs to happen on the outdoor irrigation. But those investments were made as well as groundwater storage, managing our own groundwater basins, and treating our contaminated groundwater basins. But the statewide system is linked directly to how we manage things locally. Recycled water, for example, requires that you have a certain quality of water coming in so that you can reuse it. And in fact, our Colorado River supply is much higher in salinity than our imported state water project water. So having the right blend of those supplies is important to stretching our local supplies and our recycled water. Same with groundwater storage. If we're going to replenish our groundwater basins in Southern California so that we can rely on them, we need to have water of sufficient quality that goes into those basins. There are regulations and standards that are required, and so having that kind of quality going into the basin is very important.